welcome. This is the first episode of The Other Side Unplugged, the episode of our main show, The Other Side Australia, with Damian was out on Friday night. If you haven't caught that one yet, it's episode 401. This is our new show, which is going to be appearing whenever we feel there are enough topics to talk about, or if there's a major topic to talk about. But it's a more rough and ready sort of format, not quite as slickly produced as The Other Side, the main show, but something that enables us to put out more content faster and quicker for you. So we'll be doing that. And The Other Side, the main show, will now be a fortnightly show, as we announced last Friday. Every second Friday, that show will be coming out. So there won't be an episode of The Other Side, obviously, tonight. This show going out instead. And The Other Side will be at its usual time slot next Friday night, dropping at 7 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time for everybody on the Friday night. All right, so we're going to air 31st of January, Friday the 31st of January, and I have two very special guests for our first episode of Unplugged. First of all, we have Dan Ryan in the house. So Dan, welcome, mate. You are a lawyer, but also the founder of the National Conservatives, which we'll get into in a little bit of time. We're going to have a chat about that, but maybe just briefly give us a quick rundown on your background and how the NatCon thing got started in Australia and what it is.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer, have 20 plus years, spent a lot of time in Asia like you did, Damian. I've been involved in the think tank world in Asia and globally for a long time. I attended ARC last year in London, and I met Miriam Cates, who was a Conservative MP, and she said, "Dan, what's going on with national conservatism in Australia?" And I said, "Well, pretty much nothing, Miriam, but I know we're on the same page." So it provided the impetus to plant the flag for that, which I think is the dominant, governing ideology of the Trump administration. It's a wave which is coming, but is still poorly understood in centre-right circles here in Australia.
Okay, so we've talked a lot on this show about libertarianism and classical liberalism, and our show does extend all the way to conservatives, and so it's interesting to talk about these political distinctions, and we will get into what national conservatism is, how it's different from those other ideologies, and what you're hoping to do with that a bit later on in the show. But introducing also our other guest, who is a familiar face to people who've watched The Other Side over the years, Sydney marketing and advertising guru, Sean Masters. Sean, welcome. Good to have you back on the show.
Good to be here.
And mate, very quickly,
I would counter Dan by saying that libertarianism is in fact the predominant political ideology of Trump. I am being somewhat facetious there, but there's certainly elements of that we've seen, certainly with the Doge and things like that, really reigning in government.
All right. Well, I'm not going to turn today's show into a debate about national conservatism versus libertarianism, but you've given me a great idea, Sean, as you always do. I will take that away and we'll do that one day. I think that the three of us should get on and have that discussion, because I know it's a hot topic among centre-right and right-wing circles in Australia at the moment. Okay, so Sean, just quickly for people who haven't seen you before, your background very quickly, mate.
Yeah, I've been a creative director, copy-based creative director in Sydney for the last 25 years. But over the last, I'd say, 8 or so years, have taken an interest in politics, because I think it's almost immoral of you not to, because I believe we are in a critical juncture in history where if we don't stand up for values that are holding this nation and indeed the Western world together, everything will fall apart. So I have taken an extreme interest in politics over the last few years. That began with journalism. I've appeared obviously on your show, Damian, as well as SBS, written for the Australian various publications.
And you ran for Lord Mayor of Sydney more recently, right?
Yes, and John Ruddock and the Libertarian Party got in contact with me and convinced me to run against Clover Moore. And the campaign line was "We're over Clover." I ran against Clover Moore because someone had to.
Yeah.
And at the end of that, if we're sort of issuing CVs, at the end of that campaign, John Ruddock offered me a role as senior advisor, which I have taken up. in New South Wales Parliament. So that's been very interesting, writing speeches and coming up with policies.
I want to start our first topic for today, guys, which I think is a really important one, and one that I know that you've done a bit of work in the area of, Sean, and we have had you on the show to talk about this previously, but we had the news this week that in Queensland, which of course has recently become a Liberal National Party state, again, the only mainland state in Australia with a Liberal National Party government, there is going to be a review. They've announced a review into hormone therapy for kids who think they are trans. The Crisafulli government says that stage 1 and stage 2 hormone therapies are going to be immediately paused for all new public patients under the age of 18. So that was the news. It's going to be paused. But the news for me is that this stuff has actually been happening at all in the way that it has been happening. The Brisbane Courier Mail newspaper says that for at least 5 years, Queensland children as young as 12, I mean, just stop and think about how young that is, right, have been prescribed puberty blockers and gender-affirming, I'll put that in quotation marks, gender-affirming hormones without proper medical support and parental consent. Without proper medical support and parental consent. It's just absolutely astounding. And the health minister, this is basically centered around a rogue services at a gender clinic in Cairns in the north of Queensland. And the health minister, Tim Nicholls, the state health minister, the new one, says that the Cairns Sexual Health Service delivered an apparently unauthorized pediatric gender service without an agreed model of care to 42 pediatric gender service clients, so 42 children, 17 of whom were prescribed stage 1 or stage 2 hormone therapy drugs in a way that, quote, may not align with treatment guidelines, he said. So this is really, to me, quite astounding and horrific stuff. We hear the left banging on all the time about listen to the science, listen to the science. Sean, just to start with you on this, what is your understanding of the state of play on the science, I guess, and because there isn't, science really behind this yet, is there?
Well, that news coming out of Cairns is no shock to anyone who's been following this closely for a few years, as I have, because what we've discovered, and everyone has long suspected, is that these so-called standards of care are just based on nothing other than the wishes of hardcore trans activists. And this was revealed in the WPATH file. So WPATH is the worldwide professional standards of care for trans health.
Okay, so there are standards, global standards.
Yes,
right.
But what has been discovered by leaked documents of the WPATH files is that activists have been running that, not actual medical clinicians. So you pay $200 to become a member of WPATH, and you're in. So there's been instances where patients have been on a consultative clinical call, and activists have been on that Zoom call advising them to head headlong down that road into a trans life and the medical procedures that involve. So these kind of horrific things are starting to get revealed. My concern with the independent review is that activists do slither their way into this world of reviews quite often. So as they have into WPATH. So that is a concern that we do keep it independent. Now, a wonderful independent review that the world has seen, and any sane individual who cares about children's actual health, was the CAS review that Damian and I have covered. Unfortunately, the Australian media haven't as much as they should have.
The Other Side with Damian Coorey is Australia's best independent news commentary show. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with The Other Side Unplugged. More content when it matters. but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame. And follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side.
So this was the big British National Health Service, their big public health NHS thing. And they looked really deeply at, with this woman, Professor Cass, who looked really deeply into the question of gender affirming care. Weird term. I mean, we just take on all these terms as if they're nice and positive, but gender affirming care means that you're not allowed to say to a child that presents or thinks that they're a different gender that they're not that gender, which really cuts off any avenues for suggesting that that they might be experiencing just some kind of other mental illness or problem. Anyway, the Cass review, just quickly, what it found, Sean, was pretty...
Well, let's just delve into that very quickly, what you just said there, Damian. Yeah. The issue is that it's a chicken or the egg problem, where you've got these children present 30 to 60% are autistic. Many have experienced sexual abuse or homophobia at home. They present with cutting, eating disorders, high levels of anxiety, depression. So the trans and, gender dysphoria. So the trans activists say all these constellations of other issues are as a result of your gender dysphoria. But of course, what is slowly being revealed is what any sort of right-minded person just instinctively knows, is that the gender confusion is merely one of the other factors that, as part of the whole constellation, there's a deeper issue. There's a deeper issue at play here. So not being able...
It could be any of those things, right? It could be any one of those different possible diagnoses, or all of them.
Or all of them, or something even deeper that does need to be explored through conversation. But by saying gender affirming care, quite cleverly, you cut off any exploration other than just driving headlong again into that road to trans and medical, it must be said, using the correct term, mutilation. So back to the Cass review. Now, this was the biggest of its kind. It's a gold standard review into gender affirming care over a dozen countries. Delving into those countries, I think 24 standards of care within those countries, and it found there is absolutely no evidence for assigning a child puberty blockers, and that would lead to any kind of positive mental health outcomes. Now, what's very interesting is that one of the countries that the Cass review did analyse and assess was the Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne, run by Dr. Michelle Telfer.
Right.
Now, the Australian standards of care are based on two bodies: the Worldwide Professionals for Trans Health, WPATH, and the Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne. That's what our national standards of care are based on.
Right.
The Cass review reviewed the Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne, and gave them 17 out of 100.
Holy cow! Okay,
right. So when we hear Health Minister Butler talking about this is based on Australian national standards of care, that is what this is being based on.
Right. Okay. So it's based on Australian national standards of care that rate 17% out of 100. Dan, I just want to bring you in here. On the question of the political response to all of this and how these things evolve and get into our political culture. As somebody who self-describes as a conservative, what's happened to us? I mean, how have we just let the left take over in a sense?
Yeah, I think the key point to make, which Sean made, but I'll reiterate, it's not just that there were deviations from the guidelines in CANS. The guidelines themselves suck. They're based on bogus science. So those guidelines need to be completely torn up and delegitimized in Queensland and Australia-wide. The UK has banned puberty blockers. We are now pausing them in Queensland for 3 months, pending this new independent review. God willing, that review will say ban these in total. The Trump administration overnight came out with an executive order entitled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation. Does not mince words. But that's what's been happening, right? In Australia, we have been drugging up, messing up and cutting up vulnerable kids in the name of misguided empathy. And people like the former, or everyone involved, practitioners, bureaucrats, politicians, are ultimately going to be held, if not legally, then morally responsible for these atrocities. And the hero in Queensland here has been child psychiatrist Gillian Spencer, who was stood down for protesting what she saw up close and personal as being just gross malpractice, to be honest, and twisting of science. The Queenslanders and the Victorians and everyone else, the ones involved in this gender care, were originally trained in a large part in the now discredited Tavistock Gender Clinic in the UK. That was the one the review actually reviewed. So it is nuts beyond belief that the guys in Australia, the medical profession, who haven't covered themselves in glory these last couple of years, still maintain this line as though the laws of gravity apply differently in the UK than they do in Australia.
I didn't realise that Tavistock, because that was the clinic in the UK, just for people who don't know. That was the clinic in the UK that the Cass report focused its investigation on.
And that's where they got this new magic where they could determine whether a kid was really was a boy at age 11 or whatever. It'll be put in the dustbin of history, this nonsense, in due course. The legislative change is already happening, but it's been driven by money. It's been driven by drug companies who want to have these people on drugs, expensive drugs for their lifetime. It's been driven by, most charitable way of putting it is, very misguided people, often with personal issues and an axe to grind, who think that someone wanting to be a boy is that it's a girl wants to be a boy is some unfair restraint on their self-expression. And that we should do everything we can. And we're not even able to question that at any level.
Which is the problem, right? That's the ridiculous thing, because the science isn't there. It isn't there yet.
And Gillian in Queensland, she is not, she is a, secular vegetarian, not culture warrior from central casting by any stretch of the imagination. And she's the ideal spokesperson for this. And she, in a just world, all those guys at the Queensland Gender Clinic should have their licenses taken from them.
Well, I think so. And I just want to show this clip, this thing you were mentioning from Trump. Senator Ralph Babet in Victoria posted this today. Protecting children from chemical and surgical mutilation, executive order, January 28, 2025. It's one of the presidential actions, which is great to see. But it does give you an indication of just how, strong leadership can deal with these things if it's committed to it and is determined to do it. Obviously, we pussyfoot around. We take a long time. I feel like this is going to go down in history, Sean, as possibly a major, something that you said earlier, you both said that we're going to look back at and go, God, how did we ever let that happen? And shame on us as the men and women, grown-up adults of Australia, that we let this thing go on under our noses, the actual mutilation of children.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm kind of getting a little bit annoyed with people who keep saying it's one of the worst medical scandals of all time. It is without question the biggest medical scandal of all time, because it is directly targeting children. And I am convinced that a generation or two, when we finally extricate ourselves from this woke apocalypse, people will start looking around and going, and they'll say, where were you when they were doing this to 3-year-olds? Where were you when they were saying that a 3-year-old could be born in the wrong body? What were you doing when, they were trying to tell feminine boys and masculine girls that they were born in the wrong body? Where were you when it was proven that 90% of kids that fronted these clinics like the Tavistock were in fact same-sex attracted, when we already know from research done by Kenneth Zucker in the 80s that if left alone, 90% of these kids grow up to be healthy, happy, gay adults. So in the name of trans ideology, we have found ourselves in a position where we are, it's gay conversion therapy all over again. So the question is, people will start asking, where were you to people in about 20 years' time? And I think my 3-year-old son will ask the same thing. And I can say, well, I was on the other side with Damian.
We were sitting around talking about it, screaming. It matters. It does matter. It makes a difference. Believe me.
In all seriousness, I can say, I stood up for this kind of stuff. A great professional risk, but I think you've just got it.
Yeah, you have, mate. All right, I just want to close out this by just reading a little bit out of the Brisbane Courier Mail newspaper report. It said that stage 1 is puberty blocking hormone treatment. That's what's being banned. So that's the drugs, the hormone drugs. Stage 2 is gender affirming hormone treatments. What is the difference? I'm not quite so. One's puberty blocking, the other's gender affirming. So obviously different drugs doing different things. Puberty blockers stop physiological changes to the body that don't fit the child's identity, while the hormones go a step further and allow children to actually change physically and go through puberty with the gender they identify as. Oh, great. All right. So let's say there is, 0.01% of children that are born who have genuine, if you believe in this or you believe there is science to support this, who genuinely believe they were born in the wrong body. Not something I'm sold on.
Can I just say that the statistics are already out on that, and 0.183% of kids can be born in the wrong body, have genuine gender dysphoria, but typically these were very feminine young boys. So we're not saying that this sort of gender dysphoria doesn't exist, but what we are seeing is an explosion in this trans phenomenon that can only be social contagion. We're seeing a 4,000% explosion in people identifying, particularly young adolescent girls, identifying as trans. We're seeing at some private schools 40 to 70 kids, girls, identifying as trans. So
who would have thought that teenage, prepubescent adolescents would be a little confused and latch onto the latest trend, right?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with fashion until the fashion results in your genitals being removed.
Are the doctors not putting themselves at huge risk? Dan, sorry, over to you. I mean, the doctors, right, could be sued, could be in future jailed. This is outrageous what they're doing if it is determined that there's no science behind this.
Well, the ones in hands, the details of that haven't been fully disclosed, I suspect if they're outside their guidelines, they put themselves at serious legal jeopardy. The issue that other doctors will use to defend themselves is to say, well, we're just acting in compliance with the guidelines, so they can't be accused of negligence. But there's a world of grey there. And I think they should be genuinely worried. And given these new orders from the Trump administration and what's coming down the line in Queensland and Europe and elsewhere, I'm hoping to see a lot of rats jumping from the ship because they can see which way the wind is blowing. With those Trump orders, I don't think it's fully appreciated in Australia that the US government does a lot of medical research with Australian institutions, and that funding is tied to specific guidelines. Now, they changed the guidelines and says, we will not cooperate with you, Australians, if you continue with this stuff. That funding gets cut. That money talks and, bullshit walks, as they say, and that will have an impact as well.
Right.
So just one little small point. I think this whole line, trapped in a wrong body, I think that's a slogan that some of the gender activists use. Gender dysphoria is a thing. People confusion about their gender. Being trapped in the wrong body. Being confused can be a transitory thing. It can be a long-standing thing. But what we're talking about here is the treatment for it. Now, and there's a whole lot of different models. In fact, none of them should involve puberty blockers. That should be the key message of all of this. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that this argument that, we've got to get in early. If we get in early, it's all going to be so much better and so much easier is just too easy.
It's been proven that that puberty is the solution to this gender confusion. So allowing a child to go through puberty is the solution to, not the cause of all their issues. And just between puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, or certainly the results of taking them, the side effects. I mean, when it comes to puberty blockers, a big issue is but your bones turn to dust, osteoporosis, there's issues of mood disorders and seizures and things like that. But the problem, the real, and it can lead to sterility, certainly, but the real issue is when you get to, now I'm not saying puberty blockers are a huge problem, I mean, without getting too graphic, I have to say, but people need to learn the truth that if a boy starts taking puberty blockers, at a very young age, his genitals don't grow. So if he decides to stop taking puberty blockers down the track,
he's left with very small.
So people do need to know the horrible truth. But when the problem is that 95 and upwards % of kids who start on puberty blockers go to cross-sex hormones, and that's where you run into absolutely life-changing results that can often do lead to death. So you've got constant life of danger of blood clots, seizures, heart, a risk of cancers. And Dan earlier mentioned the money that patient is worth, which has been estimated at about $1 million per patient. And part of that is because of the cross-sex hormones and the other range of issues that can result, medical issues that can result from them. They need to take a range of other medications through their entire life. So
what we've got is President Trump standing up to drug companies, standing up to pharmaceutical companies that are acting corruptly and badly.
Yeah.
And having the balls to stand up to them, basically. And that's, getting him criticised by the left, of course, as usual. Yeah. All right. Look, I just want to close out. We have to get on to our next topic, but just to close out on that, I just want to point to the fact that the Courier Mail says that at the same time that that concerns were raised in May 2024, so May last year, about that clinic in Cairns operating out of its scope, there was already an independent review into Queensland Children's Gender Service underway. And but when the findings of that review were released in July last year, the former Labor Party Health Minister in Queensland, Shannon Fentiman, somebody who's been put forward and very close to becoming the new Labor leader and could be Premier one day if her career keeps going positively, she was the one who actually touted the state's paediatric gender services as providing safe, evidence-based care that was consistent with national and international guidelines, according to the Courier Mail. The paper also says that the alarm was raised about the Cairns services by a whistleblowing health worker who had lodged a public interest disclosure when they came into contact with a 12-year-old patient from the Cairns Sexual Health Service who was prescribed puberty blockers without the required consultations with psychiatrists, psychologists, endocrinologists, fertility specialists, pediatricians, social workers and GPs. And the paper says these protocols are a must for children 14 years and under. They should be a must for everybody. I mean, it's just unbelievable stuff. Anyway, we could talk about that one all day, but what a shame it is on us all. Sorry, Dan, just close out there.
Shannon Fentiman's name, this is the former Minister for Women, Minister for Health in Queensland, needs to become a byword for absolutely grotesque damage that she caused to women in Queensland, and her name needs to be subject to ridicule globally, as do many of the doctors and health bureaucrats that were presided over this nonsense. And it's not enough for conservatives, as they center right. Sometimes we say, oh, well, we'll put that beside, or they meant well. No. There needs to be accountability to the full extent of the law, so that these guys never try and pull any of these types of or similar stunts again.
Yeah.
The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, we have Donald Trump back in the office now in America, switching to our next topic. And we had the first White House press briefing by Trump's new press secretary, whose name is Caroline Leavitt. She had quite a few very interesting comments to make, and I do just want to very quickly play a clip of one of those if we can get that up. We'll do that now.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we? Good to see all of you. It's an honor to be here with all of you. A lot of familiar faces in the room, a lot of new faces. And President Trump is back, and the golden age of America has most definitely begun. The Senate has already confirmed 5 of President Trump's exceptional cabinet nominees: Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. It is imperative that the Senate continues to confirm the remainder of the president's well-qualified nominees as quickly as possible. As you have seen during the past week, President Trump is hard at work fulfilling the promises that he made to the American people on the campaign trail. Since taking the oath of office, President Trump has taken more than 300 executive actions, secured nearly $1 trillion in U.S. investments, deported illegal alien rapists, gang members, and suspected terrorists from our homeland, and restored common sense to the federal government. I want to take a moment to go through some of these extraordinary actions. On day 1, President Trump declared a national emergency at our southern border to end the 4-year-long invasion of illegal aliens under the previous administration. Additionally, President Trump signed an executive order to end catch and release and finish construction of his effective border wall. By using every lever of his federal power, President Trump has sent a loud and clear message to the entire world. America will no longer tolerate illegal immigration, and this president expects that every nation on this planet will cooperate with the repatriation of their citizens. As proven by this weekend, when President Trump swiftly directed his team to issue harsh and effective sanctions and tariffs on the Colombian government, upon hearing they were denied a U.S. military aircraft full of their own citizens who were deported by this administration. Within hours, the Colombian government agreed to all of President Trump's demands, proving America is once again respected on the world stage. So, to foreign nationals who are thinking about trying to illegally enter the United States, think again. Under this president, you will be detained and you will be deported. Every day, Americans are safer because of the violent criminals that President Trump's administration is removing from our communities.
Okay, so some pretty powerful stuff there. What I don't get, and Dan, you might be able to speak to this, why do the left have such a problem with the idea of a nation having borders and protecting its borders and, you know, getting rid of people who have illegally crossed those borders?
Well, why do they have? Because they don't believe in limits. They don't believe in the nation state. They have this utopian one world idea that there's no difference, it should be no difference between people who come from different cultures and the one from which they came. I must say, Damian, this open borders liberalism is something that was shared by both the pre-Trump right in the United States to a large extent. You have all those clips from George W. Bush And Ronald Reagan himself, back in the day, saying, you know, there's no George W. Bush, this family values don't stop at the Rio Grande. Jeb Bush, you know, exclamation mark, saying that illegal immigration is an act of love. And then those early clips of Ronald Reagan basically saying illegal immigrants in crossing the border from Mexico should be put up in public schools. It's from a different era. Yeah. So
was that coming from a feeling that they just had to appease sort of the centre left and try to win some votes, or do you think it was genuinely part of Republican and conservative thinking in those days? That
I think there is a strain, dare I say it, a libertarian strain, which doesn't believe in borders either. I mean, I know my libertarian buddies well enough that there's certainly a large cohort that thinks a border is a restriction on someone's freedom.
Is right? A government restriction. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we let our libertarian friends speak to that. So, Sean, what's the take of the libertarians in Australia, at least, on board?
Look, they say that 80%, if you believe in 80% of libertarian values, you're a libertarian, and I certainly do when it comes to government spending and the need for smaller government and things like that. But when it comes to open borders, I think you'll find the bulk of libertarians don't believe in open borders because that is just insanity. Barack Obama was coined the name the president of deportation. He deported 3 million illegal immigrants, more than any other president in America's history. So, you know, it's what is fueling this, I think, and why the left have a problem with it, is what has crept into left-wing politics is a kind of utopianism that Dan points to, and it's well-funded. George Soros believes in an open borders policy. He believes that America, the nation-state of America, creates the greatest danger that the world faces. So he's promoting an open borders policy. I think what's fueling it from the left is pure virtue signaling. It's moral status to say, everyone is equal and there should not be a nation state. But to anyone who has a go at, say, Australians trying to limit immigration, if you ever get into an argument, I'd confront it with two questions. One is, should a government prioritise its own citizens? And I think any rational person would answer yes to that. And the second question is Australia experiencing a housing crisis? The answer to that is yes. Therefore, we must limit immigration. But the problem is, as soon as you mention limiting immigration, the left cannot have a sensible adult conversation about it. They resort to ad hominem name calling and immediate. That's it. So everyone's scared to bring it up. But what is really interesting is the stats coming out of America when it comes to the election. There is a county called Starr County in southern Texas, which is 97% Hispanic, and they voted Trump in with a 58% margin.
Wow.
So what is interesting is that those who were sort of last in are most concerned about illegal immigration because they well know that the legal immigrants next in very, very well may take their jobs.
Yeah. Do you think that Trump and the Trump camp were beating up the fear drums a little bit when they constantly talk about how these people are criminals, they're rapists, they're all criminals? I mean, that's something that the left criticised rightly. I think that's a bit damaging. But there is an element. She did go on to list a number of cases where ICE, their immigration police, had actually stopped people who reported people who were criminals, and no doubt there's a small percentage of them who are serious criminals.
Anyone who enters the United States illegally is a criminal.
By definition, of course.
By definition.
Yeah.
There's different types of crimes, some more serious than others. But there are plenty of those in the hardcore category too, right?
Do you think that? I mean, do you think that there is a bias, that there is this active thing of getting rid of our own criminals and sending them up north to the US?
Well, it's that recent episode with the Colombian government not wanting to accept back
The
Colombians.
2 plane loads of Colombians, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got to ask yourself, well, why would they not want to do that?
Yeah. Okay.
They're such valuable people and so productive and so low risk. Well, why would it be such an issue? Surely they should be welcomed as a resource.
Right. So that in itself was a very telling thing,
Look,
right?
from the go-go, 2015, when he came down the escalators, he still said it probably better than anyone. Look, there are some rapists and all the rest of it, and no doubt some very nice people. But and that is the truth. And it's not saying everyone from that country is horrible. Obviously not. But it has been a strategy of governments in South America to send their worst to the United States to get them off their own books.
The Other Side with Damian Coury is Australia's best independent news commentary show, bringing you up to speed and diving deep on the issues that matter most in around an hour, with a new episode dropping every second Friday. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with the Other Side Unplugged. Damian will drop comments on the news whenever something important happens, and in-depth interviews with people who have real insight and value to add. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame, and follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side.
Because nationhood's important. The nation state's important, right? Tell us a little bit about the philosophy and history of the nation state for a second. Get a bit philosophical.
Well, I guess it's national conservatives differ from what I would call the bipartisan liberal consensus that existed in Australia, the United States, and England since at least the 1980s, and certainly since in the post-World War, in 3 important areas: immigration, trade, and foreign policy. We are not in favour of open borders immigration. We basically want to bring it down to basically zero. We want to be producing our own citizens. That's the most stable, the best thing. That's what a nation state should be about. On trade, we want to apply a realist approach to trade. It makes zero sense that we have a trade agreement with China where 100% manufactured goods can come in here duty-free. We will never have a manufacturing industry in Australia ever again as long as that agreement is in place. All this business about building the future in Australia, that Jim Chalmers is promoting our treasure, and everyone else is wishful thinking as long as you don't get your trade agreements in place. And likewise on foreign policy, we need to look back, and this is probably an area where share similar types of views to some libertarians. We've had 30 plus years now of interventions in countries where no objective assessment about what has been occurred can say it has been resulted in a net gain to us and in many cases the local population, from Libya to Iraq to Afghanistan to Yemen to Serbia to and now Ukraine. We need to have a foreign policy much more focused on our vital interests, narrowly defined, rather than this utopian evangelicalism which wants to remake the world in our own image. It was always never going to happen. The results are in. It's been foolish. And those 3 areas and others have been what has powered Trump to the White House and brought him back to the White House. But I think in Australia, the centre right, they like different aspects of it, maybe the DEI stuff, the greenhouse stuff, but they haven't cottoned on to at least those 3 core things, and their views are still diametrically opposed to that. So they haven't really grasped what the core driver of the Trump ascendancy is, and other politicians in Europe who march under the National Conservative.
And you think if they did that in Australia, we would see more support for that. Isn't Australia, though? I mean, I get the feeling when I go down to the ballot box and hand out how-to-vote cards for whatever party I might be supporting at any particular time, is I find that there's just an incredible, and I get it online all the time, an incredible left-wing leaning in this country. I mean, it is a majority lefty country.
But they have never been, no mainstream party in Australia has offered anything on those 3 areas.
But the reason they haven't offered it, Dan, is they can't get elected if they do. That's the thinking, right? I'm just playing devil's advocate here because you know how I
That's
feel
what
about
was
this.
said after Barack Obama got in, and the Republicans did their own assessment, and they said, we need to be nice to women and minorities and everything else, and that's where the future lies. And the Tories in the UK were famously averse to being the nasty party, but it's not a question of being nasty or nice. It's a question of providing policies that are going to be popular with the public and that are actually good for your nation's state.
And selling them, and educating.
And selling them, but even selling them in a kind of oddball way like Trump did, right? It wasn't exactly focus group tested his messages before he came out with. And it wasn't simply that he was being brash or strong. That wasn't, if it had just been that, he would have ended up like a Clive Palmer, God bless you.
Yep, okay,
Clive.
yep.
He actually had political substance behind that sort of whatever.
Policies
right?
with depth, and now he's executing those and showing leadership, and that's he's doing what he said he was going to do. Look, I ran in the last federal election and got 2.6%. Sean, I don't know what your percentage was in the Sydney Lord Mayoral race. How did you go, and what was your view of the electorate after that experience?
I got a heroic 4%.
Mongrel, you beat.
Now, the party was actually... Now, look, John Ruddock was elected to the upper house in New South Wales with a percentage of 3%. So as far as I'm concerned, as far as the party's concerned, to get 4% in the wokest electorate in New South Wales.
Yeah, that's unreal. Cool.
I'll use that word again, heroic. But it is hard to do the mental arithmetic on a scenario where there is a hypothetical situation where you walk into a room of people, walk out, there's a guy standing there with a clipboard and he says, there were 100 people in that room and 4 liked you. Well done. We cannot be happier with that. But it gets a little bit more complicated when it's a new party name, Libertarian, was formerly Liberal Democrats, and someone unknown. But, look, as far as the race was concerned, it's interesting. There's a lot of lessons I think conservatives can learn as well as libertarians, anyone right-leaning, which is that the left are very organised. We know that, but to see it firsthand was, really an eye-opener. Throughout the campaign, I reckon there would have been at least 12, felt like 1,200 mayoral functions, forums that I had to front and speak at, and they're all organised by left-wing activists who, get online and get their Facebook groups together and then get out there and speak to Clover Moore and organise these functions. Yeah, so it was interesting to see just how left, not just the activists were, but the council itself. It surprised me that it shouldn't have, but it surprised me that Lyndon Gannon, the Liberal candidate, at every single mayoral function he got up, the first thing he said was, my greatest achievement throughout my role as a councillor is securing $500,000 worth of funding for the LGBTQIA2S plus Qtopia Museum.
Wow.
Now, that's the ostensibly the most conservative member on council. So I knew my work was cut out for me right from the get-go. But eventually I actually addressed that and said, look, the left is obsessed with being kind, but when you think about it, kindness in politics is mutually exclusive, because if you have a certain amount of funds and you want to give $500,000 to the gay community, the LGBTQIA2S plus community over here, you're not giving $500,000 worth of funding to struggling families over here.
This is the basic economics that the left doesn't understand, right? That there's a set amount of funds and you do one nice, kind thing, and then there's another nice, kind thing that doesn't get the money, and then they think conservatives aren't nice and kind when all we're trying to do is increase the pool of money that we have and also be able to distribute that in a way that supports, things that need to be supported and not wasted.
Yeah, it goes back to that virtue signalling thing of the moral high ground, the moral status of being kind. And anyone who wears a "Be Kind" T-shirt concludes their tweets with #KillYourself. I'm only being half facetious there. Yeah, climate was a huge issue throughout. the campaign. Clover Moore, infamously, in my opinion, in 2017, declared that Sydney has a climate emergency. Yeah, to which I said a couple of times, how many climate-related deaths have there been in Sydney since 2017? And the absurdity of the question does highlight the nature of the virtue signalling. And related to climate, there were a whole bunch of questions that we were hit with. I think it was action item 4 of the Piedmont Action Group was we demand electric-powered leaf blowers. To which I said, well, thank you very much for raising this issue of electric-powered leaf blowers, because it gives me the opportunity to remind myself, and indeed everyone here, why I am running as mayor and for council, because Sydney is in the middle of a cost of living crisis. People can't afford to pay their rent, their mortgage, small businesses are dying, there's zero nightlife, roads are congested. And I promise, if elected, these are the issues I will be working on day and night. And when it comes to the issue of electric-powered leaf blowers, I promise I will give that precisely zero thought.
Yeah, well, good on you. But that's what I mean. Here we are, right? We're stuck in this left-wing lunacy that somehow, gained credence and credibility to the point where Clover Moore is, she got re-elected, right?
Well, yeah, she got re-elected. I think the incumbency carries a lot of weight. She hasn't done a terrible job with the city apart from the bike lanes.
Right.
So there is that. But what I objected to was the ideological nature of the council. I submit that the what is it, the 4 R's: roads, rates, rules. Let's throw in rats, given it's Sydney as well. That is what a council should be focused on. But when you start reviewing statutes, as Councillor Yvonne Weldon insisted we do, when you start installing hashtag racism not welcome street signs, when you start calling Australia Day Invasion Day, you start to divide the city and indeed Australia, and that is something I find deeply objectionable.
Yep.
The Other Side is Australia's best completely independent news commentary YouTube channel, bringing you up to speed and diving deep on the issues that matter most. Our fortnightly news catch-up and deep dive show, The Other Side with Damian Cooley, drops every second Friday night. And our new random The Other Side Unplugged content will appear whenever we have high-quality, meaningful content that matters to bring you. To keep producing and growing, we rely on support from ordinary viewers like you who care about the quality of news and commentary in Australia. The best way to support us is by becoming a member of the exclusive side on our website and contributing a small amount each month to the cause. You can do so for less than $5 a month, and we'll drop you an email when we post new content so you never miss a thing. Check out our website at othersidetv.com.au. That's othersidetv.com.au. Or scan the QR code on your screen now with your phone camera. This is The Other Side.
All right. Well, look. Let's jump ahead, because I think we do need to talk about Australia Day. The polls at the moment are a bit of a disaster for Albo, and is it any wonder? Are we at a point where the tide is turning? Do you think, Dan? Are Australians sick to death of this whole kerfuffle that we have every year around Australia Day, and we're just getting back to celebrating the nation a bit more?
Well, I'm sick of it. I think a lot of people are sick of it. I think the polls show people are pro-Australia Day, a majority at least now, more than they probably have been in quite a long period of time, or at least where there has been polling on this issue. One point I'd make, though, Damian, and not to sound like a record on the NACON stuff, is that, again, I think the Liberal Party has looked at Trump and thought, okay, we need to emphasize, patriotism, and that's the electoral winner, because if we looked at what's happened in the United States, and that's to be welcome. great stuff. I appreciate it. But what they haven't worked out yet is that it wasn't just a generic patriotism which was electorally successful. It was a change in policies which protect the nation state, trade, immigration, and foreign policy. And there's been no change on that. I mean, there's no real difference between the Liberal Party and Labor on trade. There's no difference between the Liberal Party and Labor at the margins on immigration. There's a 25% cut that Dutton's committed to, but that's, often an incredibly high number that have come through in the last 2+ years.
You talked about zero immigration before, and I didn't pick you up on it, but I do want to just ask that question. Do you think that we need some immigration? And indeed, what you were talking about earlier with the Conservatives and the Republicans historically in America, Reagan and Bush saying, we're supporting open borders to a certain extent, was because, wasn't it, of cheap labour, of the need for this idea that America needed workers and it needed cheap labour, and that's always been the conservative side of politics or the right-wing side of politics reason for supporting some degree or some level of immigration. Just speak to that for a sec.
Yeah, well, look, that's been the worst reason for supporting it. I don't think conservatives should never have been in favour of cheap labour. Some, race to the bottom libertarians have been. But look, it's not just me calling for net zero immigration. I noticed Nigel Farage in the UK just online the other day is now calling for net zero immigration to the United Kingdom. More even mainstream types like Suella Braverman, who's a former Tory minister of the Home Office, she has said that immigration in the UK should be in the tens of thousands rather than the hundreds of thousands. Now the UK has a lot bigger populations than us, so the tens of thousands here would be it would be a very small number in Australia. So this is fast moving mainstream, and it's partly moving mainstream because of the fact that we have had an incredible number of people come to Australia. We've had Adelaide number of people dropped on us in the last 2 years.
The population of Adelaide, yeah.
We're on track to have a Canberra or a Cameron Darwin increase this coming year, and for that to continue, it's seemingly in perpetuity. So who are the radical people here, right? Like this, that obviously number is completely out of control.
So you don't think Dutton's got it, right? You think that the Liberal Party are still too weak on this and could go a lot stronger without losing electoral support?
I think it's an electoral winner across the board. You get applause on Q&A for saying immigration should be cut. You get applause on Andrew Bolt for immigration should be cut. You don't get. It's a 70% issue. Stopping mass immigration. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, issued a declaration, as Americans want to do, saying the era of mass immigration is over. Like
himself, a Hispanic descendant, former senator from Florida.
Yeah. But imagine an Australian politician saying that. Like that shows how far away we are from our traditional allies, the United States and the United Kingdom. I mean, mass immigration is toxic now, and it needs to stop immediately.
Are we going to start seeing Labor freaking out and shifting a little further to the right on these issues? And it seems to me like Albo will say anything. Like we saw Grace Tame's absolutely idiotic, childish and offensive inappropriate T-shirt that said F Murdoch that she wore to a prime ministerial event, and Albo just standing there laughing and shaking hands with her when she should have been asked to leave and change her shirt because it's inappropriate to wear that in any environment or to be that childish and immature. I know that she's a victim of child sexual abuse. I've limited my criticism of her in the past for that reason. I did get told the other day by a feminist TERF activist who I quite like and support that I really shouldn't raise the fact of her child sexual abuse at all when I'm speaking about it because you're not supposed to raise those issues. And I pointed out that if I didn't raise that before I criticised her, I would be criticised for not raising it. But anyway, I'm going to criticise her because I think she's a bumbling idiot, and I don't mind saying so. And she's a buffoon and making an absolute fool of herself and a fool of our politicians who don't stand up to her with these stupid, childish pranks of the brat left. And she typifies the brat ideology of young women her age of the left. And it nauseates me that we don't have a culture that stands up to that and allows young women who are of that ilk to get away with things without adequate and appropriate and sensible and balanced criticism. The Prime Minister did not make any criticism. He laughed, he shook hands with her, but then he got on television a couple of days later and sort of had read the room, I think, and then changed his tone a little bit. Are we going to see Albo changing his tone on lots of things, do you think?
I think, look, they're political parties and they're nothing if not politically shrewd about what they need to say to get into office. You may well remember former Labor politicians saying there's no carbon tax under the government I lead. I actually suspect that the risk for the centre-right parties is that the Labor will outflank them on immigration and come out with something much more serious, in the same way that, the Barack Obama types and stuff used to talk up their tough on immigration stance when actually, beneath the surface, they weren't really doing as much as they claimed. So that's the political risk that the Liberal Party actually get outflanked in the lead up to the election on this key issue.
It's a bravery issue. Australia is in stark loss of any brave leaders, in business as well as politics, and as Dan's been saying, if Dutton just got out there and spoke a hard line on this when it comes to mass immigration, there would be an avalanche of votes headed towards Liberal.
Sean, your background's in marketing and advertising. Mine's in public relations. I'm not confident. I mean, the research, there must be research, right? They must be doing the market research. They must know that the market is not there to support this. Okay, so what's going wrong? Yeah.
I think it's a bravery issue, and they just don't have the guts to support what the vast majority of Australians believe. Now, no one is saying that there shouldn't be some very controlled immigration. But mass immigration, as Dan has been saying, is the issue. Because when you get mass immigration, you get what the Danes now refer to as certain ghettos. And Denmark has been taking an extremely very interesting hard line into this. What they have done is they nominate every year different ghettos based on race, based on employment, and based on criminality. And then they actually go into apartment buildings and they remove families and put them into, disperse them throughout the country. They ensure that 25 hours a week of from year one upwards is devoted to understanding Danish culture and values and tradition. Now, I reckon there's a hell of a lot of people working full-time jobs who don't do 25 hours of actual work a week. So that's quite a lot. But the point is, with mass immigration, you get these, what the Danes refer to as ghettos. You get these mass suburbs like, in Western Sydney, we're seeing suburbs that are entirely, Indians. And I find that heartbreaking that people do not want to experience Australian culture and values and become a part of Australia. And that's sad from one point of view, but it gets dangerous, what we've seen in, say, the north of England, where you've got Muslim Pakistani suburbs, entire suburbs where young men don't live a day of their lives without they don't speak English. They go from the mosque to the corner store, and they get radicalized, and that's where it gets really dangerous. So, we need to integrate people, and you cannot do it with mass immigration. So that is the issue, and we need a politician that has the guts.
Well, we've got this idiot who won't stand in front of the flag, the Australian flag. So that's how divided we are. And we've got 12% of our population still voting for the Greens. And they're going to continue to vote for the Greens. We're not seeing any change in the polls on that. I would have thought by now people would have woken up to just how ridiculous they are. Adam Bant saying, well, we've got a lot of work to do to overcome the racism and dispossession that Indigenous people face. Symbols of this country are very hurtful to the First Nations people of this country. I mean, this is a leader of a major political party now, not a minor political party. This is the Greens. They're going to be in government if Labor wins. They're going to be in a coalition of Labor Green if the government, if the left actually manages to get across the line at this election. It scares the living daylights out of me, and it reflects the nature of the country.
Well, listen, again, it comes back to bravery. We do not have a major politician out there saying the following: if we continue to open the wounds of history, we will never heal. What we need to do is respect all Australian citizens, respect and love them as one big extended family under one flag. It doesn't matter who you are or where you've come from, what colour your skin. It does not matter. Once you get to Australia and respect Australian values, you are embraced as an Australian. So patriotism is the path forward to ending racism. We do not have a politician who has the guts to say that.
The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside.
We need to get back to the idea of assimilation and integration. We have to have a dominant core culture. That is what nationhood is. And if we continue with this left-wing lunacy, you will see the right-wing lunacy on the other side of the neo-Nazis nut jobs, of which there are about 4 in Melbourne at the moment that run around playing dress-ups. These clowns will grow because more disaffected young men will think that that's the only way to respond. The left are responsible for that emergence, and now they're trying to point to it and say, well, this is racism. National identity matters, and having a national culture, core culture, and requiring immigrants to integrate and assimilate, as my ancestors did, and so many other Australians' ancestors did in the past, in the 20th century, is critical. Dan, obviously a significant part of what it means to be a national conservative, but also I would go, and I'm half Lebanese, half Irish, but I would go one step further and say, that's my heritage, I'm third generation Australian, but I would still say that those ancestors did not come here saying, oh, I want to bring my home culture here, or they came to Australia to have a new life and to adapt to values, and those values didn't fall out of the sky. They came from somewhere. They came from a history. Talk a little bit, Dan, about that history, about the Judeo-Christian ethic, about the Enlightenment values, European Enlightenment values, and the British systems and institutions that have made Australia what it is that we seem to just ignore these days and take for granted.
Well, I'll take a slightly different tact, right? Because I think the nation state has been misunderstood again by the centre right in Australia since the Hawke-Keating-Howard era. What a nation is more than simply a bundle of liberal axioms. It's more than simply values. As J.D. Vance said in his nomination speech, America is more than an idea. It's not just an idea, right? And so in theory, yes, anyone in theory from any corner of the globe can come here and become Australian. But the process is slow. It happens through intermarriage, through burying your parents, and sometimes through, a cultural or sometimes spiritual conversion to the new culture. So I think we've lost sight of that. It's not simply let's sign up this corporate statement of corporate values and therefore you've joined the new corporation. Nations are different to that. They're not simply defined by values either, Damian. A Frenchman who believes in freedom of speech isn't an Italian who believes in freedom of speech, right? It's not just values. Likewise, Benito Mussolini, Antonio Gramsci, and an Italian Pope are all Italian, even though they believe in different ideological things. So there's more to it. A nation is for a people, and you can graft on new people so that they become part of this new people. But I think it's not an ideological conversion which occurs. It's more than simply institutions. It's a slow process, and we have been over the last 30 plus years with these dramatic numbers and also the policies that we've promoted internally. We have misunderstood that. We have misunderstood the wisdom that the founders of this country had, because they knew it was possible to bind people from Irish heritage, like me, and from different ethnic groups in the British Isles, which didn't always get on fantastically, to bind them to become a new people. Australians, Italians, Germans, and all the rest of it. And they're precious things, nation. So look, long story short, you can have whatever policies you like. John Howard was very big on values, but at the same time had huge numbers of new people come in here. We need a pause, pause,
Yes.
so that we can give ourselves the chance for that magic of Australia to work. And if we don't do that, then no kind of policy under the sun and no standing in front of Australian flags is actually going to be able to provide the solution that we need.
It would help if we would just stand in front of the flag, get a main one. That would sort of help a little bit, I reckon. It's like a tiny step, a baby step for Big Adam to sort of come out from the woke hell in which he lives.
Oh, for sure. But Bernie Sanders from the left is in favour of restricting immigration, right? So in a way, immigration is the political Achilles heel of the left. You'll get a fair chunk of that left vote who comes along with you if you are credible about it, because they know it affects the cost of their labour.
Yeah.
It affects the cost of their housing, all the things that the main political parties profess to believe in.
Well, final thing I want to just touch on, these pubs that banned Australia Day. And they originally banned it, and then they got hauled over the coals, and they said, okay, we won't ban Australia Day. Then they went back and banned it again, including, I think, the Regatta Hotel in Brisbane, which is one of my favourite watering holes, but maybe won't be for much longer. So thoughts on that? I mean, Warren Mundine wants a tax on these pubs that banned Australia Day. God bless him. What a great idea. Trump-style tax on them. I want to just go to you on this, Sean, first of all. I mean, what is happening in the marketing and advertising world in Australia around woke these days, that these corporations, and this is a hospitality group that's owned, I think, by a private equity, Hong Kong-based private equity firm, partly, but obviously locally run. What is going on in these woke corporations in Australia? Corporations, period.
Well, I mean, when you're talking the really big corporations, they're committed to ESG, and the S bit of ESG is social, and that comes down, that boils down to all these kind of woke ideology.
DEI is part of the S.
And the DEI is part of the S. So if they don't adhere to it, BlackRock and these incredibly woke financing companies don't finance them, and they run out of capital. So it's you'll find it's never an Australian family owned pub. It's always these big international conglomerates that generally have a 22-year-old girl in marketing working for them who's left leaning and wants to boast at a dinner party with all her friends that she banned Australia Day from the pub or the pub group that she's running. So when you delve into it, it's always an overseas kind of thing.
Well, I've got to say though, if you look at the Bud Light Anheuser-Busch fiasco, that was an Australian marketing woman killing an American brand.
Wow.
Yeah. And you saw, and you may have seen the comments I made. Dee Madigan, who's currently always on the Gruen transfer, and is a creative director of many years, went on when it came to she was asked on Sunrise, I think, what she thought the fallout was of Woolworths banning Australia Day merchandise when they lost $2 billion. And she was asked about woke in general, and she said, it is impossible to go broke if you go woke. It will never hurt your brand. Now, that is just insane, because Anheuser-Busch lost $28 billion and had to backtrack before with before shareholders actually.
I still know people who won't buy Gillette razors. I know men for years have refused to buy Gillette. I'm one of them.
You have Target, who stocked LGBTQIA2S plus friendly clothes for toddlers, lost $12 billion in 10 days from a company worth $60 billion. If you go woke, you will go broke, because the quiet people out there, they shop. You can tell from the bottom line that they're putting their money where their mind is and where their heart is.
And Woolies copped it, of course, locally.
Yeah. As they should have. Yeah, we need a day to celebrate being Australian, and I would say that a brand that went out there and was bold enough to say, we need a day to celebrate being all Australians, and we may, I hazard to even say this, we may pause for reflection very briefly, but we must celebrate what Australia has become, because if you look into any nation's history, all nations' histories are written in blood. It's no different in Australia, but we can be proud of the nation we are today, because I would say we are objectively empirically not a racist nation.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think that what we are forgetting is that you've got to honour, it's one thing to say, okay, we've got this Indigenous culture. Okay, that's fine. That's a part of who we are. That can be a part of who we are. But, and we have immigration, we have immigrants and immigrant cultures, and they've helped to add value to the country. But to say that there's nothing that means being Australian, there's nothing British, Anglo-Celtic, Judeo-Christian, European Enlightenment, I come back to all that stuff, that history, that we just wipe all of that, we just forget it, we never celebrate it, we never say, oh, hang on a minute, the liberty, the freedom, the democracy that we enjoy, that didn't just fall out of the sky. I think most kids today take that for granted as if it's like, oh, it's a given, every country has that. No, they don't. Go travel the world, open your mind, open your eyes. This is special, it's rare, it's unique. And we need to look at where it came from. We need to honour that. We need to educate our kids around it at school and university instead of ignoring it, or worse, putting it down as colonial imperialism. No, this stuff is important, and we need to value it and honour it and have one day where we do that. And the 26th of January 1788, I'm afraid, was the day, that that we had the first settlement of Europeans on this land after many discoveries of different parts of Australia by different Europeans, I guess. I think it's an insult to ignore that date completely, and to be calling it Invasion Day and accepting that it's Invasion Day is something that I think's losing traction, not doing the Aboriginal or Indigenous cause any good. And it's only left-wing Aborigines and the left-wingers, the radical left-wingers that are marching now. I mean, those rallies this week were just down, I think, by about 50% in terms of attendance. So people are getting sick of it. They see that conflation with the left-wing causes and the, from the river to the sea, always was, always will be. It's like, it's really just quite pathetic. Dan, any thoughts on the rallies and the presence of the left and the Palestinian stuff as well, I guess, being all wound up in it?
I think the corporates are learning their lesson. I'm not a marketing expert, but clearly in the US, even the most docile marketing person working for a Fortune 500 company can see that, maybe the American public are a little bit sick of this, which celebrates every culture except American culture. And so...
You're a lawyer. I mean, what are you seeing in the legal profession in Australia? I mean, I have...
Well, they're the worst, among the worst. I mean, certainly in the top, in the metal contention. But look, so many of these people are driven by financial motives, right? Like, because there's a huge industry, anti-discrimination law and all the rest of it, for which DEI is gospel, and basically DEI philosophy underwrites a lot of the need for that legislation. I look, obviously celebrate Australia Day. I celebrate the flag. I just wonder whether the right in Australia needs to get under the hood and realise why these campaigns to delegitimise Australia and all the rest of it would never have flown 30, 40 years ago. And it's not, I think, simply ideological. if you have, again, large groups of people from all across the world come here, many of them, with the best will in the world, cannot assimilate in that quick period of time, and are taught in the schools that there's something illegitimate or that they should celebrate every other culture apart from Australia, and maybe aren't political junkies and get into the same stuff you and I do, and they just assume that that's the dominant way of thinking.
You said something interesting then. You just said campaigns to delegitimize the nation of Australia, right? So it's active. It's a campaign. It's coming from somewhere. What's your theory on where it's coming from? What's driving it?
Well, there's different. I mean, some of them are simply people. Universities is part of it, but I also do think, like, if you have come from a completely different culture to Australia, it takes a while to give up your affection for your own country. It's actually a human.
Well, yeah, I mean, it can take 2 or 3 generations. I mean, I just went to Ireland for the first time in my life, and I felt a real affinity to the place. I thought it was lovely, and I thought, okay, this is my heritage. I went to the place where my ancestors were from. I don't have any living ancestors there. And I know the Irish people get sick of Americans and Australians and everybody turning up going, I'm from, I'm from so-and-so. They're like, yeah, right, okay, you and 10 25 million others. But
one of my, been here 5+ generations now, but it took, I think, 2 or 3 generations for them not to want to be returned to Ireland and be buried, or at least one of them was buried. They got Irish soil taken out here so they could be buried in it. So that's Irish, quite close to British culture.
Yeah.
Other people from more different cultures, it takes a while. It's understandable why they don't immediately, as soon as they get off the plane or the boat, have the same level and depth of affection and understanding.
We've got it. You've got to give it time, right? You have got to give it that bit of time, and it's got to be slow immigration. It's got to be small immigration. It can't be a million people in 18 months we've got?
So immigration is best if it's low and slow, is what Corey, and a guy from the States who's a bit of a guru on this, says. I agree with that. Look, we went pre-Federation from having 55+% of the population that was born overseas after Federation to having a lot lower number. I think we're going to see the same thing here. 50% of people born in Perth, I read the other day, they live in Perth, were born overseas.
That's not healthy. That's not healthy for a nation. No.
I mean, Jordan Knight, who's a colleague of mine at NatCon, he says their numbers are like, petro states in the Middle East, where they have such a large proportion of population born overseas. You need to reduce those figures surprise people in the UK. They certainly surprise people in the United States, where we sort of dump on the UK and other people's. We just need to get those numbers dramatically down, so we give ourselves a chance of turning newcomers into our own people, right? That's you can't do it with such dramatic numbers, and you can't do it with such a large population that is born overseas. It just you have to pull it back. There's no two ways about it. And the best will in the world won't do it. Best policy in the world won't work unless you get the numbers dramatically down.
All right, guys, look, great talking to you. And thanks very much. Just, quick 30-second wrap up from each of you. If I left anything out about your personal pursuits at the moment, do you want to just give a plug to your respective social media or whatever? Dan, first of all.
Well, if people want to find out more about national conservatism and understand it better, there's the nationalconservatism.org.au website. There's also a Twitter handle, NatConAus, and a YouTube channel where I've also interviewed quite a range of different people from Australia and overseas to better, get people to better understand what is actually driving this new right agenda overseas, and which hasn't yet hit Australia.
Really good interview with Moira Deeming too recently, so people might want to check that one out. And Sean?
Look, feel free to Google Libertarian Party or New South Wales Libertarian Party and find out about the values and the ideas behind that party. I am at woke not welcome on X, and I think if you've got a memory that that was inspired by Clover Moore and the council installing hashtag racism not welcome street signs. So I've run with that, and you'll see some satirical breakdowns there on the media.
Yeah, love
and our culture.
Good on you, Sean. Thanks very much. And thanks, Dan, for coming on. Just a reminder, everybody, The Other Side will be back, our second episode of our main show, episode 402, on Friday, February 7, I think it is, Friday, February 7. And we will catch you then. And in the meantime, make sure that you enjoy all of our clips and other content on our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz, AUS, at Other Side Oz, and follow us on Twitter at Other Side Oz too. And please do check out our website at othersidetv.com.au, othersidetv.com.au, where you can sign up and join us and help contribute if you want to see more of these conversations and more of the great thinking of these of people like these great gentlemen here. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Damian. Appreciate it.
Thanks, sir.
The Other Side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside.
The Other Side with Damian Coury is Australia's best independent news commentary show. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with The Other Side Unplugged. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame. And follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side. Stay in touch. Check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month.